we're discussing arguably the most famous royal book of all time, the book, the seminal Diana, her true story in her own words. Now, it may not be new, but despite many other books having been written over the decades about Diana, Andrew Morton's biography is the only book the late princess ever cooperated with. In this so-called unauthorised yet authorised biography, the pages are filled with her own personal recollections, giving readers an insight into the woman who was and continues to be so misreported and widely misunderstood. And it's difficult to overstate the impact that this book had when it was first published back in 1992. It was like a grenade thrown into the story of royalty, blowing wide open a world of secrets and scandals that the royal machine had been carefully and quietly working around. And over 30 years later, it remains unparalleled in its access and up-close perspective on one of the most famous women the world has ever known. So I'm thrilled to be joined by the author himself today, Andrew Morton. A very warm welcome to the Royal Beat Book Club.
I love the intro. I couldn't have written it better myself.
Well, that's very kind of you to say so. I mean, but it is all true. And it remains a book that is unparalleled. Did you ever imagine that 30 years on from writing it, you'd still be talking about it?
No, well, I mean, it was. I knew it was a bombshell at the time.
Yeah, I bet.
But it's one that which has had reverberations for the past 32 years. And who would have thought back in '92 we'd be talking about Queen Camilla? Because at that time, she was the mistress. The three of us in this marriage.
But you weren't even allowed to, despite the fact that Diana had given you that as her truth. And felt that there was an affair taking place under her nose. You weren't able to commit that to the page. So Camilla, it was described as a secret friendship, wasn't it?
That's a very good point. Yes, I've always written it was a secret friendship, never an affair. Because as the lawyer said to me, how can you prove it? Because were you under the bed listening and peeking? No, it was, in a way, a better phrase because it indicated Diana's state of mind. She felt it was a secret friendship that was affecting her marriage, and it was.
Yeah, and then some. I mean, let's get to how the book came to be and rewind back to the time that you were already writing books about members of the royal family. You were on the Royal Rota, you were on the Royal Beat, but you weren't connected to a specific newspaper at this time. And I think in so many respects that may have been to your great fortune. Yeah,
that's a very good point. I mean, Diana was casting around for somebody to talk to about her life, her unhappy, miserable, despairing life inside Kensington Palace. And she thought about, do I go to the BBC? Do I go to ITV? And she knew that they had very close connections with Buckingham Palace. Then she thought about the newspapers. And again, she wasn't enamoured with that. And she knew that I was writing a book about her. And you
were writing Diana's Diary. That was the working title of the book.
I'd written a book already called Diana's Diary, about her kind of a frothy tome, about her year's life, at Highgrove and elsewhere. And she liked it because Prince Charles hated it. So,
why did he hate it?
Because the description of Highgrove was uncannily accurate. So they always try and dismiss these things, but that was an authentic description of life and the makeup at Highgrove in the West Country, Charles's beloved place. And I'd written a book on the Duchess of York, Sarah, and got to know some of her friends, and I got to know some of Diana's friends, and I was writing books inside Kensington Palace. Andrew the Playboy Prince, would you believe, described by one critic as the worst book ever written. I'd built up contacts, and one of them specifically was an old Etonian, a chap called James Colthurst, a doctor, a good friend of Diana's from her teenage years, and he started giving me stuff from Diana herself.
Now, without this relationship, this book would never have been, right? He is so key to the story of this story, isn't he?
Yeah, he acted as the intermediary between myself and Diana, because for me to go to Kensington Palace to ask questions of her life was a big no-no, because I was well known as a royal writer, 6'4", I'm pretty unmissable.
Hard to pop in the boot of the car.
and the blanket doesn't even cover me, so, you know. And he acted as the intermediary, and it worked a treat, because I was able to ask her questions, and James would turn up at Kensington Palace on his push-up and beg bicycle, park it, have lunch with her, and then go into the sitting room, and then he would munch through a plate of biscuits and go through the list of questions
That you had submitted to him for her.
to him. And she and the first time he came with a battered old tape recorder, put a tape in, and recorded her. And the first time I heard her speaking was in a working man's cafe in North Ruislip in North London. And all
for our American viewers, it's kind of nowhere of nowhere, right? I mean, it's an unremarkable spot, is what we're trying to say.
It's an unremarkable part of suburbia in North London. And all around me, there were these guys in their blue overalls eating their bacon and eggs and bacon
working men.
And beans.
Yeah.
And I put these headphones on, and I expected Diana to be talking about, you know, her humanitarian mission, what she was hoping for as to achieve as a princess, and going forwards after 10 years in the family. And it was quite the opposite. She was talking about a woman I'd never heard of, Camilla Parker Bowles. She was talking.
You'd never heard of Camilla until that point?
Not really, not as a central figure.
So it wasn't an open secret by any stretch?
At that time, just so that people are aware of this, Camilla and her husband, Andrew, had actually sued a journalist who'd written in their book some phrases relating to Camilla and Charles, and they'd earned damages out of it. So it was it's quite the opposite.
So I mean, this picture here, this is taken in 1979. She would have been married then, a married woman, to Andrew Parker Bowles. Would that be right?
Yeah, and remember, Charles and his set all just said, they're just good friends. And how do you get around that? They're just good friends. Diana didn't believe it, and so as I listened on the headphones, she was talking about Camilla. She was talking about bulimia nervosa. She was talking about these kind of desperate cries for help, these kind of suicide attempts or throwing herself downstairs and so on. And it was literally like entering another world. It was like, you know, like the wardrobe in Narnia.
Yeah.
And you knew you'd been given a secret, and that secret was quite a dangerous secret, because it could affect the lives of more than just yourself. And I still remember it as clearly as if it was yesterday. When I went back on the subway, on the tube, I stood right at the back of the platform, just in case I'd been watched and followed, and someone was going to push me in onto the tracks.
We'll come to why that probably wasn't an unfounded or unreasonable response, because subsequently, after the publication of the book, your offices were broken into and kind of
before,
turned over.
Just
before the publication.
Just before the publication, yes. Cameras stolen, files gone through.
But not the tapes, not the Diana tapes.
No, because they weren't with me. They were at James's. James was very. He kept an eagle eye on the tapes.